Hi, good evening. My name is Jay Rothman, and welcome to Real People, Real Stories Raw. This evening, I am excited to have a guest in the studio. Her name is Martha Hoy, coming in from the Las Vegas, Nevada. And welcome to 2020 and Real People, Real Stories. Nice to see you this evening, Martha.
That's good to see you, Jay.
So as we're going to get ready to deep dive into our conversation and share a little bit about your backstory, I just want to take a moment to welcome those that are watching live with us in the community. And if you are catching us on replay, the great news is you're just on time. It's your time. There's no right time or wrong time. It's just when you show up, that's what matters. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening. I met Martha maybe about a month or so ago through social media. And shortly thereafter, we connected on a personal video chat. And within days, I received her book, Lead with Your Heart. It is a fast read, easy read, but there's a lot to the story. And so I'd like to introduce Martha one more time and invite you to really share your story where you feel most comfortable to begin your story with us in this community this evening. So welcome to the studio.
Well, it's good to be here, Jay.
Thank you.
Well, my story in my book, Lead with Your Heart, begins when I was in a car accident in 2003. It was a fairly serious car accident. Three people had passed away, and I had 15 surgeries leading from that car accident. That was kind of the catalyst of my life. That's kind of what changed my whole perspective.
What happened for you in that moment that really changed your perspective on the life that you had been living?
Well, I was, you know, just my life was just like everyone else's. I was married and I had a job. I was going to school at night. I was going to nursing school. Um, it was pretty much just, living day to day. And, um, when you go through something like that, that is so sudden and life changing, one moment you're driving home from work and the next minute you're in bed and you can't move. The only thing I could see was the ceiling for quite a long time. And when I looked in the mirror, I couldn't even recognize myself because my face had been badly damaged. I was rear ended from behind at a very high speed. So when that happened, they knocked me across 4 lanes of traffic, and I also then had a front impact to my car. The front of my car hit the concrete barrier in the middle once I went uh, across all 4 lanes of traffic. So it was, in an instant, a life changing event. Walking was not just getting up out of bed anymore. Looking in the mirror, I didn't know who I was. I looked in the mirror when they got me out of bed the first time, I looked in the mirror. I was like, who's that? you know, that's
Sure.
me, you know? So it was in an instant, I lost uh, everything about who I was, at least who I thought I was, I guess. Yeah. So as I was recovering from this, a friend of mine brought a book to me. It's called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, a gentleman who had lived through the Holocaust. He lived through one of the worst concentration camps during World War II. It's a great read, it's a life changing read. So, from that, I changed my perspective because I knew that I had a long recovery ahead of me. Um, you know, doctors were telling me, you'll never do this again, you'll never do that again. And once I changed my perspective, because, I read this book and I thought, if this man can live through what seemed to be hell on earth and still change, he chose his perspective, he chose his attitude towards what was going on around him. And if he could live through that and not only survive, but thrive, because when he was released from the camps, he actually ended up helping people and changing the world in a way. So I thought, if he could do that, then I could probably do this too. So, it was a slow recovery, of course. You don't go from 15 surgeries. I had facial reconstruction. I had knee surgeries because my legs were crushed underneath the dashboard. Uh, I had abdominal surgeries. So it was a long process, but I ended up graduating nursing school, despite the fact that I was told I would never be a nurse, that I would never do this, I would never do that. I think that's also a part of being stubborn, because I didn't listen to any of those people. And 2 years later, I graduated nursing school. Yeah. So for all of the people that took care of me when I was a trauma patient, it wasn't long after that I got to be the person who was on the other side of the bed for people who came in as traumas, because I was a level 1 trauma.
Sure.
Because people, had passed away. So I was automatically bumped up to a level 1. Right. So after that, my personal life wasn't great. Not only was I dealing with, health issues, after I got back on my feet, I was in a pretty bad marriage. It was emotional and mental abuse at first. And after my recovery, I was also diagnosed with 2 other things. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which is a neurological disorder of the central nervous system. And I was also diagnosed with something called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is also a disease of the nervous system as well. So there I was a few years later. I was working as a nurse. My home life was pretty hellish. And again, when I was diagnosed with all of these things, I had a period where I, started to stay to myself. There was a period of isolation, because I had no support around me. And then I met a young man. And this is how I began to do work in Uganda. This is how I began to be so passionate about the work that I do with orphans. Because as I said, that I had no support around me. My family was not supportive. My husband's family, So I met a young man named Jeffrey Mugisha. He was a young man who grew up in an orphanage called Balamu Children's Village in Kampala, Uganda, which is the capital city of Uganda. Uganda, for those that don't know, is a country in East Africa. And we met online first. We talked online first. His brother, Ivan, does live here in the United States. He lives in Minnesota. My friend Tracy in Minnesota brought him here. So we bonded as friends. We were sort of support for each other in a time when we both needed a friend. We both have a huge passion for learning, both like bookworms, always with books. So, he would read a book and then he would call me and say, "Hey, Martha, I read this book." Or he's more into law and that type of thing. And I'm more into science, but we still found a way to connect over these type of things. So with finding support and finally recovering from with the MS, I had went to several specialists. I was even taken to Cleveland Clinic 7 times, because I got to Cleveland Clinic and I was told again by doctors and medical people that this is how it's going to be, and this is how people with MS end up. And after so many years, and again, I said, I'm going to choose my attitude towards this. I'm going to choose. So in 2014, I actually went back to work as a nurse. And again, no one thought that would happen. In fact, so much paperwork had been done saying that I was disabled and I was never going to do all these things that nobody knew how to do the paperwork to get me back to work. They were college supervisors that nobody knew. It was like, what do we do? This doesn't happen. We don't know what to do with this. So in August of 2014, I went back to work at Charleston Area Medical Center, and that's in Charleston, West Virginia.
Where, if I may ask, Martha, when you were applying to go back to work, where were you at with the progression of your two diagnoses at that time?
Well, they had approved, which was odd to many doctors. I was, one gentleman looked at me and said, you can't wheel your way out of POTS, which that's postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. And what that does is it affects the nervous system in a way. See, when we move, when we change positions, our autonomic nervous system adjusts our blood pressure for us. Well, that mechanism had failed me. So when I was standing up, I was getting dizzy. I was passing out because my blood pressure was dropping as I was moving and changing positions. But I had a very nice effect. I think he's an angel on this earth. His name is Stephen Lewis, Dr. Stephen Lewis. He's a cardiologist that I worked with for many, many years. He was a total blessing in my life, and I'll always be eternally grateful for him. He could think outside. He could think outside of the norm. Well, Martha, everyone does this, but let's try this instead. So with the help of a wonderful physician and, like I said, the ironclad will to get better, the MS, like I said, I went back to work with the MS. I have what's called relapsing remitting. So you go in and out of remission. And remission with MS means this. It just means that you're not having any more active lesions on your brain. It doesn't mean that you no longer have MS. It just means that it's no longer active. Multiple sclerosis, just the word itself, means many lesions. And multiple sclerosis, it's your immune system that causes lesions on your brain and your spinal cord. I have 36 on my brain, 1 on my spinal cord. But in 2014, it actually went into remission, and I have actually stayed in remission, and I have not gotten any more lesions on my brain.
How did you get it? Are you aware of how you got it into remission? Was it through any changes that you were doing?
I was on medications, which anyone with MS will tell you that's the biggest nightmare sometimes, because it's very expensive. And trying to find what works for you. And that's why I was so very grateful to Dr. Lewis. Is, like I said, he was willing to think outside the norm. He was willing to say, well, this didn't work, but let's try this. That's not how we usually do it, but let's try it. So the combination of medications and to me also is to keep moving, keep exercising, keep eating properly. That also was attributed to that as well, my recovery.
What for you was eating properly? What did you do to change your diet at that time?
lots of fruits and vegetables. Of course, here lately, I haven't been, I haven't been, I haven't been following that lately. I know, um, you know, staying away from the greasy foods, that we love so much. The greasy hamburgers and the fast food and the drive-throughs and all of that are so convenient. Um, I've never been much of a meat eater. That's never been my thing. I do like chicken, but not a whole lot. So it was easy for me to change my diet.
Okay. Do you have any idea today as to what was the trigger for these two diagnoses?
Um, well, as I said, I was taken all over to different for different opinions. As I said, in Cleveland Clinic is world class, medical care. And it's believed that the closed head injury that I received during my car accident was actually the catalyst for what had happened later.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So, and in 2014, as I said, I went back to work. And when I went back to work, Jeffrey and I had been friends the whole time. And through his eyes, I could see what Uganda was like, although I was not able to travel there yet. And we bonded. My father was an orphan. My father was given up by his mother at the age of 5 to the state. So he grew up in an orphanage, and I saw what that did to him when I was growing up. So I sort of understood how Jeffrey felt, although I couldn't fully because I've never experienced that. So as I returned to work, I said the whole time that we were friends, he never asked for anything. He just asked for friendship and a lot of intellectual conversation. So when I returned to work, I decided that I wanted to take everything that had happened to me and turn it into something good. Sort of flip the script on all of it. So that's when I had decided that I was going to pay for him to go to school. He had, this young man, right now he's around 26, so he's a very young man at the time. And he was a remarkable young man. He taught himself to speak proper English, which is, his English is better than mine, by picking up papers on the sidewalk, of newspapers that people had littered on the ground. So I knew that if he was given the opportunity, that he would definitely take it and take great advantage of it. So that August of 2014, that's when I decided to put Jeffrey through school, and that's what I did. December of 2017 is when he graduated. And a lot of things changed during that time in 2017. That is when the abuse in my marriage increased. I had went on a trip to Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. At the same time, Jeffrey was starting an organization in Uganda called Amka Foundation Africa. And because when I told him I wanted to put him through school, the only thing that I said to him was this: when you graduate, when you're finished, the only thing that I want you to do is to pay it forward to someone else somehow, some way. Doesn't have to be anything big. Just pay the kindness forward. That's all I asked. So December of 2017, the young ladies and gentlemen from that organization, that's sort of when it was formed. They decided to visit the biggest refugee camp in the world at the time, was in northern Uganda, refugees were coming out of South Sudan in large numbers. And by the December of Christmas 2017, it was the largest refugee camp in the world. And even though they didn't have much, but they had love in their hearts, and they rented a van, and they went around and they collected donations from people, donations of clothes, donations, because there were a lot of children as well, of course, in this refugee camp. So whatever they could donate, I remember they had mattresses as well. And they drove this van into what was called Bindi Bindi, into this refugee camp. And I remember Jeffrey telling me that it really was a catalyst for him to help people, because not only was he an orphan, his family, they were refugees from Rwanda, and sometimes they were mistreated for that in Uganda. So he could identify with helping people. He could identify with that, and from that, that's when he decided to establish Amka Foundation Africa as a way to pay it forward from what I had done for him.
Beautiful. That's
So
beautiful.
yeah, so and he started that, and when that was going on, as I said, my marriage was, the abuse, the things that were going on in my home had escalated. My life as a whole, although I had overcome all of these diagnoses that may have broken other people, maybe not, but I had come through all of this, and I had thrived through it. My life had become very hellish in many ways. My home life was bad. My job had turned, I was living in Charleston, West Virginia, which has a big heroin problem. So everywhere, nursing understaffed, all these things going on. So everything in my life was very toxic, starting especially in that December. And I had went to Capitol Hill while Jeffrey he had went to Bindi Bindi, and some things happened there. And when I came home, I knew that it was time to leave the marriage. I knew. So what I had started to do was break everything down behind his back. From that December to May 2018. So what I did was I packed a suitcase and I put it in my closet, in my bedroom closet, because I knew things were going to escalate. And Mother's Day 2018, that's exactly what happened. It escalated to the point where I knew that if I did not leave right then, I would not survive. So with that suitcase, and I don't want to go into details because it's not really important, but with that suitcase, I was in my pajamas, I was in my bed, and I was watching TV, and I had to grab that suitcase suddenly, and I went out to my front porch. The gentleman that lived across the street was a city detective, and I knew that if I made a lot of noise and I would get his attention, that I could be safe enough, long enough to get in my car and drive away. So just like the refugees that were in that camp, where do you go? If you are forced from your home, you're in your bed, you're minding your own business, you're watching TV, you're not bothering anyone, but you're forced out of your home. Because if you don't leave, just like the refugees, not in the same way, not exactly the same situation, but at the core. So with that suitcase And that's when my story gets really interesting, because that suitcase has been all over. Um, so with that, the moment that I'll never forget with that suitcase is I was standing at the end of the porch and I looked at him and I said, "You will never see my face again." That was May of Mother's Day, 2018, May. And I have kept good on that promise. He has never seen my face again. Um, so with that suitcase, so this is, think you're in that situation. You're in your home, you're minding your own business, you're in your pajamas, and you have to run. Where do you go? Who do you call? And I didn't have any family to call because they had cut me out of their lives because of the marital problems. I guess they felt they needed to take sides. So I had no one to call. I had nowhere to go. I pulled over to a spot where I knew that he would not look for me. And I took a moment to break down and cry because, you're running for your life. I think it's okay to take 10 minutes, right? So I called a friend who I knew was moving to Las Vegas, actually. She was starting her life all over. She had her daughter raised, and, sometimes it's good to just redo your life a little. So I called her and I said, "I don't know where I'm going, but can I come stay with you for a few days until I can figure it out?" I told her what happened, and she said, "Sure, you can help me pack." So I went to her house for 2 or 3 days, and that's when I decided that I was going to Minnesota. In the Midwest. I was in Charleston, West Virginia, so about a little over 1,000 miles away. My friend Tracy, as I said, my friend Tracy, who brought Ivan here to the United States, which is Jeffrey's brother, she lives in Minnesota. So I called Ivan, Jeffrey's brother, Jeffrey, the young man that I had helped go through school, and I said, "Ivan, I need a place to stay." He and his roommate Joe is from Rwanda and Ivan is from Uganda. And I told Ivan what was going on and that I needed a place to stay. That I had to leave my home and I didn't know where else to go. Barb was leaving. She was coming to Las Vegas at the time. He said, "Martha, you have done so much for my brother. You have done so much for Uganda. Of course you could come stay with me." So I had never seen Ivan's face. I had seen pictures of him on Facebook, and people say, "Well, Martha, how did you just buy a plane ticket and go somewhere you've never been and to trust someone that you've never seen?" Well, doll, if staying where you're at, you're not going to live, you take that chance. And I knew that if Jeffrey told me he was trustworthy, that he was probably trustworthy. And I knew that Tracy was trustworthy, my friend. So I got on a plane with a picture of Ivan on my phone. I got to Minneapolis Airport and I text him and I say, "I'm sitting next to this big black grand piano," because that's all that I could see. So when this young man in his early 20s, come around the corner with this great big smile on his face, I knew exactly who he was because he looked just like Jeffrey. As soon as I saw him, I was like, "That's Jeffrey's smile." So I stayed with Ivan and Joe for, I want to say about a month or so, maybe 6 weeks at the most, because, I'm a nurse and I can get a job pretty easily. I had to get my nursing license in Minnesota. I say it was the most boring place on the planet, but it was a great place to be at the time because of all of the things that I had lived through the last 6 months before that, with the abuse and the physical things that had went on. I needed a place to heal. I needed a place, and it was perfect for that. Minnesota is a beautiful, beautiful state, gorgeous nature. And Joe and Ivan were so good to me. I did eventually get my own apartment. I didn't, I always tell people that, that Joe and Ivan and Tracy saved my life. because if they hadn't had said, come here, I'm not really sure, what I had done, everything that I had done after, I'm not, you can't speculate, but they really did save my life in a lot of ways. So that friend that had moved to Las Vegas, I was calling her and I'm like, I feel like that I'm stronger now. And Jeffrey had the organization going in Uganda, and I felt like, you know, I lived out of that suitcase for quite a while. And I said, maybe it's time for me to find a place to settle. Maybe it's time for me to find a place that feels good, that feels like home. Although, you know, Ivan and Joe and Tracy, they were all good to me and everything, but I didn't feel like it was home. So my friend that I had stayed with, she said, I'm in Las Vegas, come here and I will help you. So I decided that when I got to Las Vegas, that I would also give back, that I would take all of the things that I had went through and turn it into something good. So when I got here to Las Vegas, that was October of 2018, that I would start a charitable organization here in Las Vegas that also helps children. It's called Mother Martha Family Foundation. And all donations that come into the organization are actually split between Las Vegas and Uganda to help there. So with that suitcase, so in this story, I've only been gone for less than a year. So the suitcase had went from fleeing for my life to Minnesota to Las Vegas. That's when I decided, as I said, to again, it's not what happens to you, it's about who you become. And that's kind of when people started calling me the Mother Teresa of Uganda. I don't know how I feel about that nickname, but that's when I really started doing a lot of the raising money and raising awareness for Uganda. In 2019, I was in Uganda twice. I visited Balamu Children's Village, where Jeffrey and his brother Ivan grew up, and met the gentleman who I think is an angel on this earth. His name is Joseph. Everyone calls him Uncle Joseph. This man has raised more children and he has more patience than any human on the planet, because right now he has about 800 children in this orphanage. And of course he doesn't do it by himself, but to do the things that he does, he has to have a lot of patience. So since I moved to Las Vegas, as I said, I've been to Uganda twice. I have been to Dubai twice. I have been to Paris, France. I have been to New York City. I've been to Los Angeles twice. I've gotten to do a lot of interesting things. Before I left Minnesota, I got to stand in the studio where Prince recorded and wrote all of his music. So I've gotten to do a lot of things since I left with just that suitcase. Because I chose my attitude, again, going back to what I learned from Viktor Frankl, because I chose my attitude, because I chose to respond with love, I wanted to take all of these things that I had lived through and turn it into something good.
What do you think for you was the inspiration behind that? Because the truth is that there's a lot of people that have stories very similar to yours, as far as having traumas, toxic relationships, abuse, and yet you took it and you used it as almost like as a catapult. You
Yes.
switched it from living the life of a victim to one of a victor.
Yes, absolutely.
It, what do you think was the moment, the defining moment when you flipped the switch from living in that life that you were living in of darkness to one of lightness, paying it forward to others?
Well, I think it was a lot of different things. A lot of things were catalyst um, in that. But I think the defining moment for me was when I left with nothing. You know, when I left with just my pajamas on and a little bit of belongings in my suitcase. Because it was very empowering, although it was kind of scary as well, you know, because as I said, I had no place to go, I had no one to turn to. You know, I left everything. We were not, you know, we had houses and we had things and this, but it was very empowering to say, I'm going to walk away from this, and I don't have to live this way anymore. I don't have to live this toxic life anymore. And that was very empowering to be able to walk
Beautiful.
away with nothing and start over again. And not only start over again, but to live a life. It was almost like when I got on the plane in Charleston, West Virginia. I wasn't in my pajamas anymore. Thankfully, I had put real street clothes on then, and got on the plane to Minnesota. I felt like that is the moment when I realized how toxic everything was that I had just walked away from. And I think that moment of just walking away and saying, I'm not going to take this anymore. I think that was the moment when it all truly changed.
From a physical perspective, I suspect that, as you mentioned, you had this feeling of empowerment, and the empowerment most likely was driven by this internal feeling of freedom, perhaps for the
Yes.
first time in many years.
Many, because it was almost, because as I said, it was almost, that suitcase, like I said, has been all over the place. I've packed it, and I've by myself, flown into Dubai. I've flown into Uganda by myself.
Mhm.
It was almost, shedding all of that fear, shedding all of that, knowing that I can choose. I can
Beautiful.
choose not to live in a toxic environment. I could choose not to live with people that have hellish minds and hellish actions, and I could also choose to live uh, in a way that I could choose my response.
Have you had the opportunity to repair your relationships with your family at this
No,
time?
no,
Okay.
no. And as I said, I never saw my ex-husband again. I got a divorce over the telephone. I I was in my nursing job in Minnesota, and I clocked out for lunch, and I got a divorce over the telephone with my speakerphone on my cell phone because I did not feel comfortable or safe returning back to West Virginia.
Of course. Yeah.
So, um, so no, that the relationship with my family has never been repaired. I'm not really sure where they're at or what they're doing.
Did you have children with your ex-husband?
No, there was no children.
Okay. You had mentioned earlier that your dad was in an orphan
Yes,
in his early years. Is your dad still alive now?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
I find it interesting the the tie-in that that was part of your dad's story, and you were universally connected to uh, Jeffrey and his brother, which led you to start your own nonprofit foundation to bring some relief, to bring some education to orphans over in Uganda. It's it's interesting connection
Yeah,
on some
definitely.
level. How have you been able to navigate through the emotional and the mental wounds, traumas from the years that you were in that abusive relationship?
Hmm. Oh, oh, doll. That was probably, because when it comes to abuse, the mental and the emotional part is the part that has the most difficulty healing, because bruises and broken bones and these things heal much quicker. Um, it took a while to get over that. Dating was not first on my list of things to do, right after all of that. So, writing my book, telling my story. When I wrote my book when I lived in Blaine, Minnesota, and that helped to tell the story, helped to release a lot of that. It still, uh, it took quite a while, especially, um, because when you are in that, and I know that, and it too, that's why I felt like it was time to tell it, because it's something that's coming to light in the world right now, these types of things. So, when you're in an abusive situation, you're very beat down. You're told you're not good enough and you can't do anything right and you're ugly and you're dumb and you're this and you're that. And when a person hears that enough, you begin to believe it, unfortunately. So, and that is why it took a while, even after my book was released, to even put my face out there to, really get out there and promote it. But the traveling and, as a, the freedom that I've experienced, I have healed from that a lot.
Beautiful, beautiful. If you had an opportunity to be in a room and have a conversation with other women and or men that have been or are currently in an abusive, toxic relationship, what would you say?
You have a choice. You have a choice. You can choose to respond. Everything in the world can be taken away from us. Everything. I was there. Everything was taken away from me. Everything I owned, you know, physically, right? Because I owned houses, we owned all of these things. Everything could be taken from you. Just like Viktor Frankl, everything was taken from them. Even their names were taken from them, unfortunately. But the one thing that can never be taken from us is how we respond to anything. And, you know, um, because when I started telling people what was going on with me, they were like, "That's your husband, or that's your whatever, and you need to stick it out, and you need to." No, you have a choice. You don't have to stick it out. You don't have to see what happens. You don't have to wait for things to change. It's okay if you want to walk away. You don't have to do that.
What would you say were the biggest lessons that you learned from your experiences back before you decided to leave? What are your lessons taken?
Um, well, I could probably write an entire book about that because I, I share those things all the time. Um, I just say the biggest one. I can't. Um, I can't say there was one big one. I would have to say there are millions of millions of lessons in what I learned. But as I said, probably the fact that we can choose. And, you know, just because somebody has a certain perception of you doesn't make it true. As I said, when you're in an abusive situation and someone's telling you that you're awful and you're this and you're that, you know, most of what people do has nothing to do with other people. It's about what's inside themselves. And now that I look back, now that I look back, I chose to believe that at the time, and I can understand why.
What do you know? What do you know about yourself today that you didn't know then? What is your truth today?
Strength. I had no idea how strong I was. I had no idea how wise I was. Um, but now I'm very grateful for it all. I'm very grateful, so grateful, because if this wouldn't have happened, if it wouldn't have happened, there were so many things, so many people have been helped in the way that Jeffrey has paid it all forward, how he is changing things in Uganda. If this wouldn't have happened this way, he wouldn't be able to do, none of these things would have happened, because what he does at AMCA Foundation Africa is they give people, young people in the ghettos there, they give people job skills. It's kind of a way to give a hand up and not a handout. And a lot of people's lives have changed because of that.
That's beautiful.
Strength and courage, strength, courage, and as I said, I because of them, because people ask me, are you bitter, are you angry? No, I'm grateful, because if it wouldn't have happened, um, I wouldn't be who I am today, because through it all there was a lot of self-discovery. Yeah.
Where are you in your process of forgiving?
Oh, I've forgiven. As I said, I'm grateful. I'm grateful. I don't hold um, any ill feelings towards anyone. If any of the people that have that did those things to me, I don't think they would approach me, but if they did, I would thank them. Actually, thank you for what you did. Because of you, I am this strong. Because of you, I am this wise. Because of you, you know all of these things happen. they the people that did these things to me also taught me the biggest lessons.
So they were, if I may paraphrase you, they have been your greatest teachers.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to take a moment to thank you and acknowledge and honor you in this moment for having the courage to come into the studio this evening and share your story. What I think is my takeaway from our conversation tonight is that your story is one of hope, courage, and inspiration for other women, perhaps men, that
Hmm.
are in a very, very abusive relationship, whether it be emotional, mental, physical, sexual, and or spiritual, or combination.
Right.
Um, you've made it very clear this evening that choice is what we all have. Even when we say we can't or we don't know how, we do have choices. We just have to be willing to walk through the fear, whatever it is that's holding you back from exiting out,
Yes.
knowing that even if you're walking out with your pajamas on your body and one suitcase,
Yeah.
what you got out of that suitcase is inner freedom. You
Yes.
broke through. in a bondage, and you came out on the other side, not only with your life intact, but you got the greatest gifts of your life, which is really self-discovery, as you shared, learning who you are, how strong you truly are, and you turned a negative into an incredible, beautiful, positive experience, not only for yourself, but for those that have been touched by your organization. And so, as we approach the hour, I'd like you to perhaps put a pretty bow on the show and share some closing thoughts with someone that may be in the throes of a very, very dangerous, unsafe environment.
Well, find safety, honey. And so many people came to me and said, "I can't believe you left these things, and I can't believe you." Listen, doll, when you let go of things, you know, even though we had, a nice home, we had a thriving business, we had all these things, but I was unhappy. It was toxic and it was unsafe. So once I let go of that and I took that choice, you know, when you let go of things that no longer serve you, that no longer make you happy, then you let go of the fear and all of those things, then you have room in your life for things rooted in love. And once that happened and I healed from all of those things, so many wonderful things are now in its place.
Thank you for sharing that. Um, I'd like to ask you a couple of closing questions. One word that describes who you are today.
Love.
Why?
Um, because I think when you have lived a life of contrast, when you live a life that is void of love, um, that's when I actually learned what it was. And now my life is full of it. As I said, once I ridded myself of all of those things that no longer made me happy, that were very toxic. Like I said, my entire life, everything was toxic. So once that all of that was shedded and all of the fear, because when you really get down to the root of things, everything is, emotionally is either rooted in fear or love. So once I ridded my life of all of those things, there was room for love to come in. When before, when my life was so toxic, everything was fear.
If you could change one thing in your life today, what would that be?
Nothing. I would change nothing. Yeah.
What what I'm hearing you say then is that you live in acceptance.
Yes.
What does that physically feel like for you, Martha?
Um, I don't know. I guess you could say, it's kind of a combination of things. It's kind of going with the flow and accepting what is. But at the same time, to get things done, you have to take action. So, it's knowing when to stand up and take action and knowing when not to. Because you can't be resistant to things because what you resist persists. So when you take action and you keep getting roadblocks, right? Then you know that's not the road for you. Um, my saying usually is this, because I'm very stubborn, and everyone that knows me personally, just everyone just laughed. Like a lot of people just laughed really hard. Because I am stubborn, and when I put my mind to do something, I'm very persistent. But I know that when you feel that block, it's time to change your approach. So that's sort of what it feels like to me. It's kind of a combination of going with the flow of things, because if it flows, it flows. If it doesn't, if you're being blocked, and then that's not the door for you, you move on to something else.
Beautiful. What does 2020 look like for you? Any idea?
I don't know, but I know it's gonna get better. It's all gonna get better. I went to Los Angeles a few weeks ago. The screenplay for my story has been written, so I got to speak to some producers, and I got to tour Paramount Studios, which was amazing. It was so much fun. I didn't get to take a lot of pictures because when they're shooting TV shows and movies, they don't want you to ruin it for people, because things that are put out there aren't actually put out to the audience for 6 months, so you could spoil things. So I got to meet a lot of interesting people and see a lot of cool things. I got to see the set of Grace and Frankie. They were not there shooting, but they were on a break, so they let me go in and they let me see the set and I walk around and sit on the furniture. um, so that was pretty fun. I got to stay off Melrose and see some friends, so that was pretty fun. So hopefully, what I'm hoping for is, because I have another appointment with another director producer in 2 weeks. So hopefully someone will like my story and pick it up, because I feel like that the more people we could reach, the more awareness to things, and I think people can connect to my story. I think they can understand. Because when you feel like I'm not alone, there's other people that are going through this, right? It makes you feel better.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I do have one last question.
Okay.
If you were writing your own eulogy in this moment, what would you say about yourself?
Oh, I'm not sure. Um, um, I'm not really sure what I would say, but I would hope that someone would mention, my strength and what I did, and I hope that in the future, as we continue to help people and continue to help children and continue to help in Uganda, I hope when that moment, when it comes, when that happens, that I will be remembered for the things that I did with charity, with Uganda, with children, and not so much, as that lady that went through all these things and left with a suitcase and her pajamas. I hope that's just part of the story. I hope it ends with, and she helped a lot of people, and we're very grateful, and that she inspired many other people to do the same.
Beautiful. Beautiful. If I was the one speaking about you, I'd say this. You are a beautiful woman of hope, courage, and inspiration. You have made lemonade out of lemons. You have defied the odds based on your experiences that you were going through. And you had the strength to get out, to walk out, and never look back other than to use it as an opportunity to reflect and process and grow so that you don't find yourself in a similar situation in future relationships, I would hope. But at the same time, your story doesn't doesn't end with you getting out. It truly was the beginning
Yes. It was
of
the beginning.
you really getting to know who you are and reaching out, asking for help, and then turning it into a mission of paying it forward.
Yes.
Through the book that you've written, which is an easy book to read, I believe it can be purchased on Amazon
Yes.
and other booksellers, called Lead with Your Heart by Martha Hoy. This is what it looks like. And you are touching lives every day that you are actively running your foundation. That's what I'd say who Martha Hoy is today. A woman that has courage and is making a difference, not only in her life, but in other people's lives.
Yeah.
A life purpose that perhaps you didn't have.
Right.
You had to walk through hell to come out on the other side to heaven on earth.
Yes.
And with that, I'd like to thank you again for joining us this evening on Real People, Real Stories Raw. Best of luck to you in 2020. And may you can continue to have the courage and strength to make a difference in other people's lives and hopefully bring some inner peace to yourself. And with that, thank you for those that have joined us this evening on live with us or on replay. I appreciate you so much. And we'll catch you next time on Real People, Real Stories Raw. My name is Jay Rothman. Catch you next time.